been a while since I last talked about this show. Before my Wii Sports ranking, the only other piece of media I ever talked about on this channel was The Loud House. But I haven't touched the show since I'd done my Loud Sister ranking back in 2020, which, just like all my other old videos, was complete garbage. And the reason I haven't been talking about it more on this channel is because, well, I was kind of losing interest in the show entering its 5th season. It felt like a lot of what I liked about the show was starting to fade away. I tried to see if maybe I could return to this with the release of the Loud House movie, but no, that just completely destroyed my interest. I haven't seen every episode of season 5, so I can't make a genuine conclusion on how I feel about it, but a part of me just doesn't feel bothered. And on top of that, it felt like the show was getting the SpongeBob treatment, as the series has been oversaturated with spin-offs and movies. You had that one spin-off starring Ronnie Ann and her family, which, while kinda decent, just feels like a carbon copy of the original, with really the only difference being the characters and locations. And then there was that horrendous live-action phase. It started out as a little Christmas movie, and then it got a full TV show, as if Nickelodeon was slowly turning into Disney. Speaking of movies, this show got 5 of them. Yes, 5! Now, sure, they all went straight to streaming, but that doesn't change the fact that Nickelodeon is basically milking the show to a point that it's no longer the same. And that's not even getting into the controversies of the show. I mean, I could bring up the allegations against the show creator back in 2017, and I could also bring up the toxic fan base of the show, but I don't want to risk this video getting flagged by talking about something that's way beyond my comfort zone. Bottom line, the show has really become a shell of its former self, and it's the main reason why I haven't bothered making any more videos on the topic. At least with SpongeBob, I had a better connection with it because I grew up watching it, whereas this show came out during the latter half of the 2010s. But recently, I've been looking back on the older seasons, refreshing my mind with it and seeing if it still held up even after all this time. So how does it hold up? Well, so far it's been pretty good. I feel like season 1 was a pretty decent start for the show. While it did have its fair share of misses, there are also the episodes I consider to be really enjoyable. And this is mostly thanks to the style of the show during its start. It mostly started out as just a slice of life comedy, and I'm really fond of those two genres. And as a family-oriented kind of guy, I like the dynamic between Lincoln and his siblings. Of course, with the show still being new at that time, it wasn't perfect with this whole premise. In fact, I think the worst episodes of this season are the ones that go against this whole idea. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let's just discuss the highlights and lowlights of the first season of the show. You all probably know the rules at this point. These are all based off of my opinions, and you can disagree with me if you want to, as I'm all for having different opinions as long as people are respectful about it. I'm also going to be changing the format a bit. Instead of discussing the best and worst list individually, I'm going to be alternating between them. I'll start with a worst entry, then a best entry, rinse and repeat until we're finished. Anyways, with all that said, let's get started with the ranking. Out on a limo. After winning a free 24-hour limousine ride, Lincoln is approached by another limo rider who shows him the rich lifestyle of owning a limo. But the power starts to get into Lincoln's head as he bosses others around him and even ditches his sisters after making a promise to let them ride with them to lunch. I had a few contenders for the bottom 5 spot, but this is the one that really managed to get on my nerves. It may just seem like our by-the-numbers rags to riches story, but it honestly feels more like a total character whiplash more than anything. There have been episodes where Lincoln went way over his head at times, but at least I was able to buy into those situations. Here, he's just acting like a total jackass. After less than 24 hours of living the high life, he treats everybody, including his own family, like garbage, when the only reason he got the limo in the first place was through some stupid contest. Sure, he does try to make things right by apologizing to the limo driver and try to request the limo for his sisters, but it feels like they just forgive him way too easily, making the apology feel really unsatisfying. Plus, we also got that whole shallow rich guy who corrupts Lincoln's mind. And they don't even try to compensate his actions by making him entertaining. He's just such a dickhead to the people around him. Thankfully, they haven't brought him back in any later episodes. But regardless, this episode was pretty bad, making it a fitting way to start off the worst list.
Well, the joke's on you, because I took some of your mustard.
April Fool's rules. It's April Fool's Day and everyone is preparing for Luann to go all out with her pranks. Lincoln is preparing to barricade himself in his room, but when his friend Ronnie Ann tells him that she's coming over, he has to find a way to make sure she doesn't get caught in any of Luann's traps. I think I like this episode mainly for the way they portray Luann's character. In episodes where she's not the main focus, she feels like one of those comic relief characters. I mean, most of those appearances are just, well, her making puns. But in episodes she has a bigger role in, they try to play into her comedic persona a bit more. With this episode, it dives deeper into her prankster side, having her play the role of this stereotypical villain type. And I actually kind of like that direction. I don't know, maybe it's because I'm just a sucker for those stereotypes. But I think this and its follow-up episode handled it pretty well. And sure, while some of the pranks did go a bit far,
I made that dish from scratch.
a majority of those pranks were pretty far between. And fitting the theme enough, the episode managed to supply some pretty humorous moments.
I've gone through every room except Lenny and Lori's. Clyde? Hello? I volunteer to clear Lori's room. It was worth it. Lori's room smells like apple cinnamon. That might be this pie.
And yeah, they do sneak in some of Luann's puns and some toilet humor. But they didn't detract from the whole experience. I still consider this a pretty good episode. It took a pretty interesting direction with Luann's character, and it managed to be pretty humorous for the most part. If only they could handle it much better with the other follow-up episodes.
The end of April Fool's always makes me feel a little blue. Get it?
One Flew Over the Loud House. This episode follows the Loud family as one of them catches the flu and it spreads around the house like wildfire, infecting everyone inside. The remaining members who are uninfected must escape the house and reach Clyde's house so they can quarantine the sick and Loud members. But with each hurdle and obstacle, one by one, the sisters end up catching the flu. This was not a pleasant viewing experience. You'd think this would seem like an interesting direction for a horror parody episode, especially with this show, but the way they execute it just irks me. First off, the visuals in this episode is really unappealing, at least to me. I understand it's trying to do a zombie apocalypse parody with the Loud family being sick with the flu, but I do not find any enjoyment watching the Loud family sneeze at each other and get each other sick. If it was just that, then that'd be one thing. But that's not my only problem with the episode. Another issue is that the plot feels frustratingly forced. Like, it feels like the episode is trying way too hard to add tension, yet most of the tension in this episode feels incredibly contrived. Like the scene where they need to get batteries for a walkie-talkie, only to find out that what Clyde was trying to tell them isn't all that important. Such a waste of time. And then there's the scene where they finally reach the back door, but instead of immediately turning the doorknob and getting out of there, they literally just stop just to see a snot bubble infect one of them, correlating in them getting the doorknob infected. Speaking of whom, this episode is really unfunny, like shockingly so. Aside from those two moments I just mentioned, we also have stuff like Lenny being too clueless about the whole situation, and they just keep driving this joke down to the ground.
Forgive me, Lily!
No!
What is wrong with you?
Our family may be turning into gross, snotty sickies, but you are turning into a monster.
I'm trying to save us, and I'm tired of you acting like Mother Teresa.
Shows what you know. Our mother's name is Rita.
And it's kind of baffling that she's the last one to get infected. If this were a realistic situation, she'd be the first one to go. And then there's also the joke of Lucy looking unfazed when she's sick, which honestly did nothing for me.
Wait! Lucy's infected!
Incorrect. I always look like this.
I feel like this episode doesn't know if it wants to be tense or humorous, because the attempts at trying to add more tension throughout the story and the attempts at trying to make the audience laugh makes the whole episode feel tonally inconsistent. And that combined with the whole gross out feel of it makes the episode feel very unpleasant. Like, in all honesty, I think I'd rather go back to watching Fungus Among Us from SpongeBob. Yeah, not a very good sign, is it?
Healthy lab to Safe Haven. We've got a level 4 outbreak. The flu? Lincoln, give it to me straight. Did Lori make it? Negative.
Why? Why? Why?
Cover girls. This episode delves into the scenarios where Lincoln's sisters cover for him by stalling their parents so he can be there for his curfew. And on spring cleaning day, Lincoln has to cover for some of his sisters up until he has to cover for all of them, putting on impressions and costumes to make him look like his sisters. But it gets even more tricky when they receive a video chat call from their grandfather. I'll be honest, there's not really much I could say about this episode other than the fact that it's just charming. Just watching Lincoln cover for his sisters and vice versa. And the escalation behind all of this is really humorous. And the saddest thing is, if they reverted back to their original clothes when they said goodbye, they would have likely got away with the punishment they received. Like, at a minimum, they would have just been grounded. But having them do their activities in someone else's clothing is still karmically justified. Not to mention cathartic, since that scene is pretty funny.
So, if you look at the coefficient on line 5.
Not much else to say about this episode. It's just charming and funny all throughout.
Uh-oh. Who made a stinky surprise for her big sister?
Poo-poo! Poo-poo!
Lori, you changed your hair. And Lily's invisible now? Nobody tells me anything.
One of the boys. Tired of living with 10 sisters, Lincoln ponders on what it would be like to have 10 brothers instead. Lisa then gives him a dimension-traveling watch so he can experience that life for 24 hours. And if he doesn't return by then, he'll be stuck in that dimension forever. At first, Lincoln enjoys the feeling and decides not to return, but after experiencing the hardships that overshadow the upsides, he changes his mind and must find the watch before it's too late. There are two stereotypes that I absolutely cannot stand in media. Adult stereotyping, as I mentioned in my updated SpongeBob pre-movie video, and gender stereotyping. And yet, that's pretty much this entire episode. And I'm sorry, but I do not buy any of these situations presented from both sides. Stuff like boys like the arcade and amusement park while girls like the mall. And girls are very caring and tender while boys are incredibly rough and don't care about their safety. And one of my personal favorites, girls are classy and hygienic while boys are disgusting.
Ooh, Lincoln! Have a little class! That's all for sports, and now the weather. It's cloudy with a chance of you're disgusting.
This is something the show was trying to avoid doing from the start. And other times it did do that, it was done more sparingly and tastefully. I mean, look at Roughin' Out. With that episode, it expressed Lincoln's fear of being like a girl. But in attempts to survive out in the wilderness, he took advantage of what he learned from his siblings in order to get back home. That episode was able to make it work. This one just plays the tired old joke of how men and women are completely different. I can't even say the show works in this plot's favor, because I don't buy Lincoln's sisters being 100% feminine all of a sudden, when two of his siblings are tomboys, and another tends to study actual shit. I wish I was kidding with that last one. The only real positive I can give this episode is how this alternate universe is designed. I'll admit, I do like the designs of the gender swap counterparts. Plus, they got the VAs at the TMNT to voice the 4 older brothers, which is a decision I think works in terms of the family dynamic.
That is literally LOL. Hurry up, Lonnie, time to go. Ooh, whoa, Loki, who moved the doorway? I'm ready, bruh. Let's rock.
I wouldn't miss it!
Good one, Mrs. Coconuts.
There's also little details like how Mr. Coconuts is also gender swap, Lex's car compared to Lola's, and the fact that Lynn and Rita's shirt colors are swapped. It's a nice little detail there. But aside from that, this episode was so painful. Just watching this show wallow in this stereotypical cliche just wasn't comforting. And if the entire show was like this episode, then I don't think this show would have garnered this much attention. Except from sheepballs in the DeviantArt community.
Ooh, the prince needs a clean shirt when he sees his princess.
Driving Miss Hazy. In this episode, Lincoln is tired of having to do Lori's deeds just for a car ride. So he opts to teach Lenny how to drive, but because she's not the brightest bulb in the family, teaching her is a bit of a challenge. That's where their siblings, minus Lori, decide to chime in to see if they can help her learn how to drive. Okay, I have a confession to make. Part of me feels like I'm in Lenny's shoes. Right now I'm in my 20s and I still don't have my driver's license. Mainly because, well, I feel like being in the driver's seat is a bit overwhelming. There's a lot of things people need to learn and remember about driving and car safety. And with the risks and consequences of being in the driver's seat, I just don't feel motivated to take on that responsibility. If I ended up getting injured because of a car accident, or if I was responsible for someone getting injured because of my driving, I would never be able to live it down. Not helped by the fact that where I come from, more often than not, I come across some terrible drivers on the road whenever I ride with my parents. Hell, my mom nearly got into a car accident because some driver had no idea how to drive on a highway. And I still remember hearing about the incident where a couple of my college classmates and an Uber driver got into a serious car accident because some drunk driver from my college rammed into him at full speed. Luckily, the Uber driver and the passengers survived, but it was a serious deal back in college. In short, I'm kind of afraid of the road. I'm kind of embarrassed to admit this, but it's nice to see two of my favorite shows tap into this situation. SpongeBob did this as a recurring character trait, and The Loud House does it for this one episode. And it's nice to see Lincoln and later his siblings teach Lenny how to drive, which once again is a good testament to the relationship the family has. Now, of course, we do have to put up with Lori's spoiledness, but she does at least realize her mistake and feels guilty. It really could have been a lot worse, trust me. And of course, the humor in this episode is really solid. If done in the right situation, Lenny's ditziness can be very charming and humorous. And this episode is a good example of the correct way to play off it.
Next, check your mirrors.
Why? Do I look bad?
No. I meant
Stop the car! I can't drive in this hideous condition.
All in all, I really like this episode. It manages to be really funny and entertaining on top of tapping into me personally.
This is a brake pedal. What does the brake pedal do? White shoes after Labor Day.
Ew, stop.
Exactly.
The greenhouse. In this episode, Lincoln's class is working on an environmental project to keep their carbon footprint as low as possible. Of course, having a large family means his carbon footprint is massive. So with a bit of convincing, he gets his sisters to try and reduce the amount of energy they use. However, at the same time, Lincoln feels tempted to play an online game, but it ends up putting him in the yellow zone. So he tries to make more compromises in order to get it to work. Do I even need to go into detail on what's wrong with this episode? If there was one word to describe this, it would be mean-spirited. This episode just constantly piles on Lincoln and tries to gaslight the audience into thinking he's the one to blame. First off, the episode starts with his teacher and classmates berating him for his carbon footprint, even to a point of threatening him that he'll become an outcast if he doesn't fix it. Do they not know he comes from a big family? I mean, there was literally an episode where his entire family was a presentation. And even when the episode wants to include Lincoln into the blame, it doesn't work because the episode fails to acknowledge Lincoln being a part of this whole situation. And even when Lincoln starts using a bit of energy later on in the episode, it feels incredibly contrived. As if the episode is saying that Lincoln deserves any sort of punishment. And the reasoning behind this episode shaming him is terribly foreshadowed, with them saying that Lincoln should have focused on the actual reason why he should reduce his carbon footprint. The episode tells us he's in the wrong, but it doesn't show us he's in the wrong. Not to mention, his sisters are so detestable in this episode. They are so unreasonable towards Lincoln, and the different ways they use up so much energy is so ludicrous. As for the humor in this episode, most of the jokes fell flat on its face. The only ones that I can recall that got a grin or chuckle out of me was the moist towelette joke and the moment with the Mona Lisa.
Lenny, instead of taking multiple showers a day, How about using this refreshing moist towelette?
And clog my pores? No way. Aww, okay. Do you mind? I'm showering.
The rest of the jokes just resort to piling on Lincoln and making everyone else around him look like scumbags. So yeah, I'm not surprised that this episode managed to garner so much hatred. I feel like if they fixed a bit of the issues in this episode, like trying to make Lincoln's sisters more reasonable, and either didn't shame Lincoln or better foreshadow and justify the shaming of Lincoln, then maybe it would have been at least a passable environmentally themed episode. But as is, it's just a disaster.
Instead of using all of these, why don't you write Bobby a letter?
Why don't I rip your little
Polar bear!
Oh, okay. I'll write him a letter. And maybe I'll send one to that little flirt, Mona, too.
Project Loud House. This episode follows Lincoln preparing everyone for school and making sure he presents his project about his family on time. But being in a large family, there come certain obstacles that get in the way of being ready. So he has to try and get everything back on track. This episode is a good example of well-executed simplicity. In a way, this feels more like a pilot episode than the actual pilot episodes of the show. While Left in the Dark did a pretty decent job establishing each of the character traits between each Loud sister, this episode I think does a much better job at it. Lori is presented as a caricature of those usual teen girls, with one of her biggest interests being her boyfriend. Lenny is one of those clumsy type characters who is all about her looks. Luna is essentially the musician in the family, and they even try to make that very clear by breaking the fourth wall.
Luna, a little man with a plan music?
You got it, man.
Luann is the prankster slash comedian in the family, and her recurring gag in the episode with the bucket of water manages to not wear out its welcome.
Not today, Luann.
Oh, we'll see about that. Failure is not an option. Get it?
Lynn is the athletic tomboy who often likes to play things rough. Lucy is pretty much your gothic poet. The twins are the polar opposites of each other, with Lana being the muddy girl and Lola being the pageant queen. And Lisa is shown to be an incredibly insufferable character, as she does a lot of the things I really hated about her in the other episodes.
Here's the antidote.
Thank you! Wait a second. The real antidote?
Fine. Hairless apes 2, science 0.
The only real outlier who doesn't really get all that much in terms of character traits is Lily. And this is mostly due to the fact that she's just, well, a baby. She does have her moments in this show when it counts, but she is definitely one of the weaker members of the Loud family. Anyways, this episode does a great job perfectly encapsulating the family dynamic between Lincoln and his sisters. You never once think that their relationship is artificial. And that's the thing about this show that I really love. My only real complaint with this episode is the absence of the parents. I'm like 90% sure most of the situations would have been resolved if the parents were here at the house. But aside from that, this feels like the perfect type of episode for the show. If you wanted to introduce someone to the show, then this is the perfect episode to show them. It's simple, funny, and absolutely charming.
And sure, life in the Loud House can be summed up in one word. Chaos. But I love that chaos. And I wouldn't trade it for the world.
Save the date. After being teased for having a crush on Ronnie Ann, Lincoln makes it clear to his classmates that they are not a couple and how Ronnie Ann is just a bullying jerk. Not realizing she was right behind him, she storms off on him, but Lincoln doesn't think too much about it because she's shown to be tough. However, he soon discovers his insults did get to her as he finds out her older brother Bobby, who is Lori's boyfriend, broke up with her. So now she puts together a double date so Lincoln can make amends with Ronnie Ann, that way Lori can reconcile with Bobby. Yeah, this is still my least favorite episode of this season. This is one of those episodes where it felt like it was trying to piss me off. The writing in this episode is just horrible. The plot of the episode is run by sheer coincidence, throwing all sorts of obstacles out of nowhere with no sense of foreshadowing, making this whole episode feel like a contrived mess. This is also Ronnie Ann's first physical appearance in an episode, but unfortunately, it didn't really do that much for me. In fact, as evidence as to how uninteresting her debut appearance was, I completely forgot that she was related to Bobby. And it didn't take until season 2 that I remembered that they're both siblings. That's not a good sign. Also, I feel like they should have better foreshadowed Ronnie Ann's sensitive side. I mean, she gave Lincoln a black eye in a prior episode off screen. But now she just storms off after being given a verbal beating? Kind of inconsistent if you ask me. But honestly, she's the least of this episode's problems. One of my bigger problems with the episodes is how they try to integrate Lori and Bobby into this episode. Because holy balls, they are so unbearable. Is they dropped the bit with the whole breakup situation and instead focused on Lori and Bobby trying to help Lincoln and Ronnie Ann reconcile, be it upfront or discreetly, it would have been 50 times better. Heck, you could still keep in some of the events that played out in this episode. If they just went in that direction, it would not only fix that issue with the episode, but it would have fitted the show's theme of family perfectly. But no. Instead, Bobby breaks up with Lori, which devastates her to a point that she's willing to murder her own little brother and essentially forces Lincoln to apologize to Ronnie Ann for everything he said to her. Not because she feels sorry about her, but just so she can get back with her boyfriend. Not only does it send a bad message to children, but it implies that Lori doesn't give a flying shit about her own family. And while future episodes try to rectify this character trait by trying to make it clear that she cares about her love life and her family equally, most of her appearances in the first season don't really do that. Episodes like Get the Message, Driving Miss Hazy, Butterfly Effect, Greenhouse, those have her being really unlikable. Hell, she used to be in the bottom half of my Loud Sisters ranking because of that, and this episode was the final nail in the coffin. And while thankfully they tried to improve on that starting with the waiting game, that still doesn't make this episode any better. If it was at least funny, then maybe. But the running gag with the mariachi band wasn't funny. Some of the lovey-dovey moments with Lori and Bobby was cringe as hell. Clyde's jokes only made him look like a horrible friend. And again, the whole coincidence moments are not funny. So for all those things, Save the Date earns its title as my least favorite episode of Season 1. And I'm hoping that I don't come across an episode worse than this in the following seasons.
Guess who's back together?
Babe and Bobby Boo Boo Bear?
Yes, wee! Reunion selfie!
Affair to remember. After declining to go to a monster truck rally, Lori suggests Bobby should take Lincoln there instead, and the two hit it off. So much so that after that day, Lincoln and Bobby grow closer together like brothers, leaving Lori to feel more like a third wheel. She wants to tell him how she feels about this, but she's afraid to hurt his feelings and possibly their relationship by being selfish with who he hangs out with. So she decides to try and find a way to make him jealous and win him back. Now onto an episode that tried to rectify Lori's character. The waiting game was a good start, but it feels like this episode was trying to be the antithesis to Save the Date. Instead of Lincoln trying to taint Lori's relationship with Bobby and her wanting to take her anger out on him, the wedge between her relationship with Bobby is all on her. She refused to do something her boyfriend wanted to do and instead suggested he'd go with her brother. It honestly felt a little cathartic. And I feel like if this episode came out much earlier, it would have probably went with her being very clingy about who her boyfriend hangs out with, only to see the toll it has on him and their relationship. It would be an interesting metaphor, but it still would have made her pretty unlikable. Instead, she sees how happy Bobby is hanging out with Lincoln, and she just lets him do it. Granted, she's still jealous, but when you consider how Lincoln just drops in out of nowhere, leaving Lori to feel like a third wheel, you kind of understand where she's coming from. It's not like in Save the Date where she's being unreasonable. And again, this all started because of her wrongdoing. And yeah, while the whole idea of Lori trying to make Bobby jealous does seem a tad cliche, it's not as bad as her trying to force anything with her boyfriend. Especially since this is actually my favorite part of the episode in terms of its humor. Like, seeing her pretend to be in a relationship with Clyde while he's unconscious is funnier than what I was expecting.
One cotton candy, please.
Hey, babe. You never eat cotton candy off my head.
I also like the pairing of Lincoln and Bobby. This was one of the first episodes where we see them interact a bit more, and they treat this little bond like a brotherly relationship. making the episode that came out afterwards, One of the Boys, feel obsolete. It's charming watching them bond together, and I also appreciate the ending of the episode, with Lori just accepting the fact that Bobby wants to see other people, and after seeing her devastated, Lincoln decides to give Bobby back to her. And then we get a moment of Lori thanking Lincoln, which is a nice family moment I feel like was really needed for her. So overall, I really love this episode. The characters in this episode are all really likable, with the pairing of Lincoln and Bobby and the character development with Lori, while also throwing in a couple of funny moments, making this an episode that puts me in a good mood every time I watch it. And because of that, it earns the title of my favorite episode of Season 1.
This stinks. This was supposed to be a romantic date with Bobby, and now look where I am. No offense, Clyde. It's just, I should be on this ride with my boyfriend. But maybe I don't even have a boyfriend anymore. Bobby doesn't seem to care about being with me at all. Clyde? Clyde!
Got him! We're 5 for 5 this week!
So those are my favorite and least favorite episodes of Season 1. It was a pleasure coming back to the season to find out that it's still held up after all this time. And while I'm cautiously optimistic to rewatch Seasons 2, 3, and 4, the first season still felt like a good start. Plus, it feels nice to talk about a show other than SpongeBob. But there are also other shows that I do want to talk about. In fact, I actually finished binge watching one show, and I also finished the first season of another. So I do look forward to making videos on those shows. And of course, I do want to talk about other things other than TV shows. I do have my ultimate Disney ranking where I rank all their animated movies. And I also do have plans for more video game countdowns as well. But anyways, I want to thank you all for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to be notified when my next video is coming out. And let me know down in the comment section what your favorite and least favorite episodes of Loud House Season 1 are. Until next time, bye.